You sent your brother to jail? I can't even imagine ever turning on my brother like that. And I know these stories usually have a twist, but I can't imagine any situation where I would ever throw my brother under the bus. Happy apple picking day! I know it looks a little different. I'm not home right now. Here's what had happened. I may or may not have accidentally deleted our bad apple thing for this week, but luckily I have all my equipment here because I'm podcasting, so it works out. The apples will go on. So just a quick reminder for all of our new friends. If you want a chance for your story to possibly featured on Am I the Bad Apple, you can submit it to my subreddit r/Am I the Bad Apple. And as a reminder, we all come from different branches of the apple tree, meaning we all have different experiences and those shape our perspectives and our opinions. We should never shame someone for just not experiencing something. It's okay to have different opinions than people. It's okay for someone to genuinely not have a perspective because they didn't experience it. Like, that's normal. That's why we talk civilly and try to educate each other, but no one wants to learn from someone who's yelling at them. So without further ado, let's get started with this week's episode of Am I the Bad Apple? Let's go apple picking! Apple number 1. Am I the bad apple for arguing with my daughter's teacher? I, 31 female, have a 13-year-old daughter. My daughter's always been a straight A student until she got to 7th grade. My daughter's always valued her work and doing well in class because she has very big dreams for the future. Last year, she had all A's, so I didn't really look at the school's grading system because nothing about her grade seemed abnormal. Fast forward to October of this year, my daughter's doing amazing in every class except English class. When I say amazing, I mean A's. In her English class, though, I realized she had a C. That's not a bad grade at all. It's just abnormal for her. When I realized she had a C in that class, she said that grading at her school was so unfair. She told me that even if you got 3 problems wrong on a 25-question test, that your grade would drop from an A to a C. I thought that was absolutely ridiculous, so I set up a meeting with the teacher. Here's where I'm questioning if I was the bad apple. I was talking to her teacher, who was an older lady, probably around 65. She was saying that my daughter was doing great in the class and that I had nothing to worry about. That's when I mentioned that my daughter was a straight A student, but her English grade was ruining that. I told the English teacher that the school's grading system was terrible and that getting 3 questions wrong out of a 25-question test was insane and should never bring her grade down to a C. Her teacher got upset and said that I shouldn't be blaming her for the school's grading system and that maybe my daughter should have studied harder. I got upset and again told her that if she thinks my daughter getting 3 questions wrong is a C, she needs to rethink her choices. At this point, the teacher was so heated, she wasn't even thinking before she was talking and told me that I had no clue what I was talking about since I had my child so young. She told me that I was basically a child raising another child. At that point, I just got up and walked out of the room, but now my daughter's saying that things are miserable in class and she's being treated so unfairly. So, was I the bad apple? Wow. That escalated quickly. Okay, I wanna address this really fast and so that we can just move on from the point. I feel like sometimes in some of these stories, like you read something and it just feels so out there that it's like, did that actually happen? So like my gut is like, did the teacher really just say that out of nowhere? But the OP says they did, and we're just gonna assume they're telling us the truth. And if that's the case, that's unacceptable. That should never have come out of her mouth. I was completely on teacher is right 100% until we got to that point in that statement. However, even though that statement from the teacher was so inappropriate and out of line and like not acceptable to say, that doesn't make anything that she said before that wrong in my opinion, like at all, in the slightest bit. And also the teacher being out of line and making that comment doesn't automatically make the parent right for everything she did and said before that either. So like, I want to get that out of the way because like, yeah, that comment's not okay, but it has nothing to do with the rest of the story and it has nothing to do with our question. So moving on from that. Did you even bother to like look at the test in question? Because I know that when I gave tests, different kinds of questions were like worth a different amount of points. So it doesn't matter how many questions there are in total, it matters what kind of question your child got wrong. Because you could have a 25 question test, and when I gave some matching answers, like, you know, match the word to the definition, things like that, that might be worth 2 points, right? 2 to 5 points. But then if I give an essay question, which typically 2 to 3 essay questions at the end would equate to, you know, 10 points each, that makes sense. You know, it's not about, oh, there are 25 questions, so it should be 4 points apiece. That's not how that works. Different kinds of questions could be worth different amount of points, and having more essay questions that would be worth more makes sense in an English class to me. So like the idea that,
well, that makes no sense. Like, you should rethink your choices.
That's like a really weird statement from Mom, who hasn't even bothered to look at the test. Like, hasn't looked at the rubric, hasn't looked at the questions, nothing. And the comment from the teacher of, well, she's doing fine, but like, if you want a higher grade, maybe she should study more. That to me is also not out of line. Like, if you have a test and you don't like your grade, the solution is to study harder and to study more. If you're getting all these big point questions wrong, then, you know, maybe that means you have a very simple and basic understanding of the unit, but not a very complex understanding of the unit, to where those big point questions you're not excelling at. And that's okay, but like, then just study more. Like, that's not an insult. That's not a bad thing to say. And I think it's also so weird for the mom to be like,
well, you need to rethink your life choices.
But you just admitted this was the school's grading system, not the teachers. Like, I am not understanding. Why are we yelling at the teacher when, like, we've just said this is the school's grading system? Like, the teacher's not going to make an entire new grading system that goes against her rules and against what she's supposed to do because you want your kid to have an A. I've seen a lot of kids, and this usually mostly happens in high school. I know they said this is 7th grade, but a lot of times kids, once they get to high school, they're used to very easily getting straight A's. And then once they enter classes that require like a little bit more effort, it's all of a sudden, well, why is Jimmy's grade so low? Well, because Jimmy's used to coasting pretty easily, and now that a little bit more effort is being required of him, he doesn't really want to put in the effort. And I'm wondering if that's happening, like, you know, if she has a little bit more of a difficult teacher who's making her think a little bit more, and she's just not used to that. But also, now that I'm thinking about the math, like, she could have essay questions that were 5 points apiece, and she got 3 wrong. And at my high school, when I was in school, that was a C, 100%. Because when I was in high school, we had a 7-point grading scale. So 85, that's a C. Now, when I taught, it was a 10-point grading scale. But I know there are lots of places around the country that still have 7-point grading scales, and like that's very normal for an 85 to be seen as a C. So again, it's just about what kinds of questions she got wrong. So we've already established that the comment that the teacher made at the end is not okay. But that doesn't mean that anything that happened before or that was said before was in favor of the parent. And the teacher making that really wrong comment at the end doesn't change any of that either. Like, the parent, you know, I encourage parents to be involved and keep up with their kids' grades, you know. And if you have a question or a concern, yes, reach out to the teacher. That's not bad. But to sit there and chastise the teacher because your kid is getting questions on tests wrong, that doesn't make sense. Now, if it's something where it's like, this is an English class, but you asked her a math problem, yeah, like, let's not be crazy. Like, the obvious little examples, we don't need to go over how genuine, obvious exceptions to general rules could be made, right? But like, if your child is not reaching the expectations or is not getting questions right, that's not anyone's fault but your child. But if your child is not grasping the material and not able to like show mastery on a test, 9 times out of 10, that's the fault of the child, right? So like, yeah, encourage them to study better or harder or in different ways that are a little bit more helpful. And there's no reason to like berate a teacher for the school's grading policy. Like, take it up with the principal if you don't like it that much. But like, there's nothing the teacher can do. So I'm going to go bad apple because again, what the teacher says at the end doesn't justify everything that the mom did and said, and I think she was out of line as well. So I'm going bad apple. Apple number 2. Am I the bad apple for calling the police on my ex? I, 32 female, had been married to my ex, Dan, 35 male, for 6 years before we divorced at the end of 2020 due to him cheating with Kate. Kate and Dan have a son who's 3, who was both conceived and born during the pandemic, while I was under high risk, and their entire affair has cost me both physical health and mental health. After the divorce, Dan moved out from my house and we haven't spoken since. Last week, Dan suddenly dropped his son off at my house without giving me any warning or explanation. He only mumbled that Kate was giving birth to their second child and needed him in the delivery room due to complications. He left before I could protest, and I've tried calling and texting him multiple times and received no reply. I don't know why he thought this was a good idea, and I had plans and they definitely didn't involve someone else's child. I ended up calling the police and told them what happened, explained that this is not my child and I've never agreed to look after them and his dad's not responding. They took the kid and I hadn't heard anything until the early hours of the same day when my ex called me screaming that I was a jerk as the cops found him in the hospital and basically forced him out of the delivery room so he could look after the kid. He missed the birth of his second child, and Kate had some complications, so she's been in intensive care. He also started shouting, saying that his son and Kate's parents are living at the opposite ends of the country and have medical conditions, so they couldn't come and look after him either. I told him you should have used some brain cells and thought about it in advance instead of dumping the product of his affair at my house. Especially knowing that him and I aren't civil, like we haven't spoken in years. He just called me an even bigger jerk. I've mentioned this to some of my friends and family. While some people are on my side, other agrees with my ex, saying that I should have just looked after him, and they called me a jerk for calling the cops. So, was I the bad apple? I think that there are going to be a lot of different opinions on this one, and I think that my opinion on her actions will probably be different than what I would have done. So I'm just gonna say that, like, if it were me, depending on what I had to do later in the day, I would have been mad about it and I would have been so annoyed and like infuriated, but I probably would have watched the kid. Now, if it happened a second time, then I would call the police too. But if it was just that one time due to the extreme circumstances, I probably would have just sucked it up for the day. Again, depending on what I had to do that day. Not for the ex, but for the kid. You know, because this is a 3-year-old kid. You know, a child doesn't ask to be born. Like, it's not his fault that the ex and his parents had an affair. Like, I would have felt bad for the kid, you know, because especially like having police officers take a toddler is probably really scary for the toddler. So again, I wouldn't have done it for the ex. I would be more concerned about the child, because like also you have to think this child doesn't know who she is either. This is his dad bringing the kid to a stranger's house and just leaving him, and the stranger calling big police officers, who a lot of kids get really scared by strangers, especially multiple. So, you know, I think that's what I would have done that one time for the extreme circumstances for the child. But that doesn't mean that I think she's in the wrong for what she did either. You know, I don't think there's anything wrong, because really what she did was call and tell the police this dad dropped the kid off. I didn't agree to watch him. I have things to do. I cannot watch him. Someone needs to come get this child. This isn't my child. And it's really no different, you know, if you've listened to my podcast, we've had, you know, daycare workers send in stories about parents just leaving their children and them needing to call the police. Or, you know, we talked on the foster care episode about parents just leaving their kids at hospitals and just abandoning them. Like, people are crazy, you know, you never really know their true intentions. And at the end of the day, that really is what he did. He left and abandoned his child in a place, in a setting that was not set up for childcare. Like, there was no consent. I'm gonna watch the kid. There was no heads up. There was no warning. There was no nothing. You can't do that. You can't just drop your kid off at random people's houses and expect everything's gonna be fine and dandy. Like, I've said this a lot, that, you know, your children are not everybody else's priority and responsibility. You can't just expect everyone else is going to drop what they're doing and change everything about their day and their lives for your children. That's not how that works. And I get that you didn't have family around, and I get that your wife was having complications at the hospital, whatever, but that's not everybody else's problem. And I hope that your wife is okay, and I hope that she recovers. But again, and like the wife that you cheated on, what? Like, that's so unfair. Like, everything about this is so tasteless and trashy, and like, oh, I don't. Again, I know what I would have done for the child, because I would have felt for the child, because that's just the former teacher in me. But I don't fault anyone who would put their foot down and say, no, you can't do this. This is child abandonment. You can't just abandon your child at random people's houses with no warning, with no whatever. Like, you can't do that. Calling the police and having them take the kid and make the parent, you know, I don't fault anyone for that. And again, I get that there are some crazy circumstances going on, but that doesn't mean that your child becomes other people's responsibility. I'm sorry, it just doesn't. If you were planning to be there for the birth of your second child, then you needed to figure it out beforehand, like not as it's happening, you know? So I'm going good apple, and I'm sure there are gonna be people that disagree with me, and I would love to hear your opinions down in the comments, but that's my opinion, and I don't think I'm going to budge on that one. Apple number 3. Am I the bad apple for forcing my religion on my family? I, 27 female, grew up in a very Orthodox Jewish family. I went to Sunday school starting at age 7, had a bat mitzvah, and all the other usual traditional things. I never really fit in with my religious family and didn't really want to be Jewish, but did it to make the peace. When I went to Duke for college, I met my wonderful husband, also 27, and we got married. My spouse grew up in a Catholic family, and I also decided to become Catholic because of him, and I found that it suited my beliefs and my morals better. When I told my family that I changed religions, they didn't take it well. A lot of my family ousted me, but thankfully, my parents and siblings, they stuck by my side and supported me. For Christmas Day dinner, I invited my close family over to my house. I cooked and wanted to make a nice meal for them, but when we all sat down and I started to say grace, my mom yelled at me and said that I was pushing my religion on them. I apologized, but said that we always do that in our home and that she should respect my traditions, as I always did her prayers when I ate dinner at her home. They stormed out, and I received numerous angry text messages. However, I really didn't think that I was in the wrong, but I just need some outside opinions. Was I the bad apple? Oh, this one will be very quick. No! Honestly, the whole background for me doesn't even matter. Because in my opinion, when you agree to go to someone else's house for a religious holiday or a cultural tradition or whatever it is, even when you just go to someone's home, period. For me, you are accepting to respect whatever traditions may happen at said event. Like Avery and I, when we go and we do things with his family, they always say grace before they eat. Do we always say grace before we eat? No, of course not. But we bow our heads and we say a prayer, and we do it to respect the traditions that they do at their home. When we go and do things with my family and they say the hamotzi, which is basically like the Jewish prayer for, I'm laughing because I'm thinking it. We give thanks to God for bread. Like, that's literally in the prayer. It's like basically just thanking God for bread kind of thing. Do we do that in our home? No, but when we go to my parents' house, if they do it for Shabbat, or if they do, you know, prayers for Hanukkah or anything like that, yes, we also sit there and partake because we are accepting to go over there for religious holidays. That's what happens. That's what you do. So it's kind of baffling to me to think, yeah, we're gonna go over for Christmas dinner, but don't you dare say any prayers in our presence. Like, do you not understand what Christmas is to Christians? So, like, I just, you know, I think that's just a general rule, that if you are choosing to go to someone's house, if they say grace before dinner, if they say the hamotzi, if you're going to a religious, cultural thing, like if you're going to an Indian wedding, right? There's going to be Indian culture there. I feel like, you know, these things are pretty obvious, right? And so that's why, like, for me, it feels like mom's just picking a fight to pick a fight because she's mad and upset. And you know, I think it's something that I also kind of relate to, because in Judaism is not, for a lot of people, it's not just a religion, but it's also kind of like heritage and culture. Like Judaism is, according to some people, a race and a religion and a culture and a traditional mindset. And you know, so even my dad and I growing up, we definitely butted heads because I didn't really understand that. And to him, Judaism was an identity, but to me, it was just a religion. And you know, Avery and I celebrate both Jewish and Christian things in our household. And for a while, when I was saying, you know, I'm not only Jewish to my dad, I was saying, he took that as me talking about my identity, you know? And for him, that was very hurtful and stressful because, you know, for those that don't know, my grandfather is a Holocaust survivor. And so for him, he was worried that I was turning my back on my identity, but I was more talking about religious aspects. So a lot of times there's a disconnection when it comes to Judaism and things like that, especially here in America, because it's more obvious in other parts of the world than it is in America, where, if that makes any sense, and like I feel like other Jews that are watching this will get that, if it's like, it's kind of complicated, but you know what I mean. So I'm wondering if there's like similar disconnects there that's causing tensions, but I don't know. Regardless, I'm going good apple. So apple number 4. Am I the bad apple for sending my brother to jail? I, 32, have a brother, Tim, 24. Tim has been trying to go to film school. In July, I got a flag on my credit report saying that someone tried to sign my name on a private student loan. I found out that my brother somehow got the information from my mom, thinking I wouldn't notice. Now, Tim is on the spectrum. He doesn't have great judgment, but my wife was pissed because we're living with my in-laws on the other side of the country, saving up for a home if and when interest rates drop. I've been trying to keep my credit score flawless for that very reason. So I did the things you're supposed to do to report it for fraud, and I called the bank, and we called the police, and we filed a report, and all the things. I tell my mom all about this, and she doesn't really say much at first, but it slowly starts coming out that my brother couldn't get a loan, and he found some paperwork about my parents' will up in the attic, and it had my social security number on it. He couldn't get the loan without a cosigner, so he just put me down. It takes months for this to come out, so my wife and my in-laws are pressuring me to file charges on Tim. I told my mom that what Tim did was wrong and illegal. My mom started crying and handed the phone to Tim, and I explained to him about what he did and that he needs a lawyer. Again, Tim is autistic and started panicking about, well, what's gonna happen to me? After the headache of his actions and everything else going on, I said, well, I guess you go to jail. Since then, Tim has been in a bad state, and his meltdowns caused him to be on a psychiatric hold. My family blames me because he keeps saying, am I gonna go to jail? Am I gonna go to jail? Am I gonna go to jail? I don't know if he actually would for what he did, but because of what I told him, he's been regressing bad, and he's been in a panic for weeks and isn't getting any better. My parents did get him a lawyer to try and calm him down, but he's back in the hospital for another stay. So I just need to know, was I the bad apple? Okay, I need to be clear that I am not an expert in this field. And I mean, I could ask Avery a couple questions, but even when it comes to special education and special needs and things like that, like, I'm not an expert. Just because I was a teacher doesn't mean that I was trained in that part of education and in that field. So everything that I'm about to say, like, is on the idea that, like, I'm not an expert in this, I'm not trained in this, and I would love to hear from people who do have degrees in this field and do work with special needs kids and do work with autistic kids and kids on the spectrum and things like that, because I don't actually know how a lot of this works. I'm giving my opinion based on only the knowledge that I have in my brain. Autism is a whole spectrum, right? And there are some people who are on the spectrum and they're very mildly on the spectrum, and it doesn't like severely debilitate their day-to-day tasks. There are other people who are on the spectrum and they cannot get through the day without assistance, and like it is incredibly debilitating to them, right? So I don't know where Tim is. Now, I'm assuming because he's going off to film school, which I'm guessing is by himself, that he is able to live and function without someone assisting him with daily tasks. But again, I don't know for sure. Like, I have no idea. The big question here is, does Tim's cognitive disabilities keep him from understanding the difference between right and wrong? Now, I can take some guesses based off of details from the story, but I don't actually know. So like, for one, coming up with the idea to see like, oh, that's a social security number. Oh, well, I could use that on a loan. Oh, well, I guess he'll never know. To me, I perceive that as like some complex thinking, right? For someone to be able to have that mindset, I would assume, and I know that we don't like projecting assumptions and things like that, but that makes me feel like that level of complex thinking would come from someone whose cognitive function could determine right from wrong, right? That's what I assume. I don't actually know. And again, my experts in the comments, like, you tell me if I'm way off base or not. That kind of complex thinking makes me believe he knows right from wrong. Regardless, I do believe that calling the police was the right thing to do, and here's why, right? There's gonna be two outcomes. Either, actually, before I get into this, let me ask our friendly neighborhood lawyer man. Avery, I have a question for you.
Yes.
And I know that you mostly did like unemployment law in different areas of law, so you might not have all the answers for this either. When it comes to lawsuits, I would assume that they have experts there who would work with the police and law enforcement, things like that, to determine if they understand right from wrong. Yes?
In a courtroom, you would do a mental aptitude test. So, like the same thing they would do with like an insanity plea or mental capacity test.
Okay.
In a courtroom, and if they met a certain mental capacity, depending on the state or whether it's federal, you would either be liable or unable to be liable. It would depend on the state, and it depends on what their crime was. If the crime has to have intent, and you don't have the mental capacity to make intent, then you can't have committed the crime.
Thanks, Avery. Okay, so we chatted, we had a long discussion. I know a little bit more of the legal process now. So pretty much, I was correct in what I was assuming. I just wanted to make sure. So I still stand by the idea that yes, call the police. So when they do that investigation and when there is a trial, law enforcement are going to bring in professionals, trained professionals, to determine if the brother is mentally able to distinguish right from wrong. Right from wrong. Ha ha. So one of two things will happen. Either these professionals will decide, yeah, he's fully capable of understanding right from wrong. Yes, he does have autism and these disabilities, but he should still be held liable because he understands right from wrong. Like, he consciously committed a crime. And if that's the case, he committed a crime and he needs to be held accountable for that. Or these trained professionals will determine he is on the spectrum and his autism is so severe that no, this man genuinely cannot distinguish between right from wrong. And in that case, Tim will not be able to be held liable, but OP will still have done what he needed to do to report fraud and get his name like off of that loan and things like that. So for me, that's the right course of action, because if Tim should be held accountable, he will be, but if not, like, he will still be fine, and OP will still be able to label that as fraud and get his name off of it, and his credit will still be fine when they want to get a house. So like, for me, that's the right course of action. And again, I know that I had some little tidbits from the legal side, but neither of us have experience in the special education world or the special needs world or anything like that. So would love to hear from other experts, parents who might have autistic children or people who might have autism themselves or autistic siblings. Like, I want to hear the perspectives of people who actually know what they're talking about, because again, I can give you my opinion based on the knowledge that I have, but I'm I'm not trained in this field. And this is what I talked about at the beginning, you know? I don't have this experience. I might have a different opinion than someone else who does have more experience in this world, and that's okay. I don't know what I don't know, you know? So I had 1 bad apple and 3 good apples. I really miss my apple plushies. At least that's what I had. I would love to know what you guys got. Did you get anything similar to me? Did you get something completely different? As always, you know that I love to read your opinions. I love to read your ideas. I don't get to respond to everything, especially I've been playing with like fake press-on nails. I like them because they're really pretty and they're cheap and they're a lot healthier than like acrylic things. But let me tell you, it makes it so hard to type. Like now I literally just text to voice with Siri, but she still gets so many of my words wrong. Like it's just a mess. So that's like a really big reason why I read a lot of what you guys say, but I can't always respond. And as always, if you want a chance for your story to be submitted on Am I the Bad Apple, you can submit it to my subreddit r/AmITheBadApple. And for your well wishes today, I'll do a little bit of relevant situations. In life, things are going to go wrong. So I hope that when something inevitably goes wrong for you this week, and I hope it's nothing too severe, but I know, you know, nothing ever goes exactly according to plan. I hope that you remember this, that you just take a deep breath and know that you got it. And I hope that the solution comes to you immediately, and I hope that it just works out exactly how you need it to, and that everything is fine. And like, I'm sending you that positive energy that when something inevitably, you know, takes a wrong turn, that it all just works out. And I want that for you more than anything. Because it happens to all of us, but you know, I hope it goes well. I hope it turns out great. And don't worry, when I get back to my house, we will officially name the bear. I did not forget. I'm just not home right now. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you have a great rest of your day and hope to see y'all next week. Bye, my lovelies. Mwah.